Nice to see a big full house here tonight. My name is Noah Cowan. I'm the artistic director here at TIFF Bell Lightbox, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to tonight's special event, our masterclass with Guillermo del Toro on Eastern Promises. Woo! And this is our special super duper version tonight because afterwards David Cronenberg will be joining us to discuss the film with Guillermo as well. Superstars in battle. It's like Pacific Rim, but like for film nerds. On behalf of TIFF, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Bell, our major sponsors, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, Visa and Audi, and major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. We'd like to thank our presenting partners of the Cronenberg program, the Government of Canada and the Ontario Cultural Attractions Fund, as well as our broadcast media partner, Space, and our print media partner, the Toronto Star. Okay, there's some rules and some reminders. So there's no scheduled intermission, so we encourage you to visit the washroom or the concession stand quietly during the course of the program. Don't do anything in your seats. We'd urge you to turn off your mobile devices, because otherwise someone will be really mad and threaten you. Photos and video recording is not allowed at any point during the event, and I really mean it. We had it in conversation with Jeremy Irons here, and someone thought they were discreetly recording something from the audience with audio, and it actually created a buzz through the whole cinema, so please don't do it. And we will have opportunities for questions afterwards from you guys too. Please wait for the mic to come so we can all hear what you're asking. This event is part of the Cronenberg Project, which is a really exciting multi-platform celebration of the films of David Cronenberg, at the center of which is David Cronenberg Evolution, TIFF's first major original exhibition with 60 artifacts, visionary designs, and rare and unseen footage. The exhibition runs until January 19th. It actually includes a new film from David as well called The Nest. I hope you've all seen it. If you haven't, please go. The film retrospective, From Within, the films of David Cronenberg, showcases the director's full works, and we're honored to have David and a number of his collaborators, as well as noted scholars, on hand for special introductions, lectures, and Q&As. They've been great, and virtually all of the films are restorations or newly struck prints, so it's well worth taking a look at them one more time. I'd like to highlight a few of the upcoming events. We have TIFF CEO and director and longtime Cronenberg scholar, Piers Handling, on Videodrome this Sunday, November 24th. Now, this is going to be a crazy one. Religious studies scholar and Cronenberg family friend, Elijah Siegler, will come and speak to The Brood on December 1st. Why this is interesting is because David himself acknowledges that he's a card-carrying atheist, so it must have been some complicated family dinners. And then I'll be presenting a lecture on Crash, which is my favorite film, on December 7th, and so come up with something to say about that soon. And finally, a panel discussion with David Cronenberg and his collaborators, many of the people who've worked with him on his films over the years, following a screening of A Dangerous Method on December 8th. The full schedule of our events are online. Finally, I'd just like to tell you about one other exciting initiative we're doing, and you can see a preview of it in the Canadian Film Gallery. It's the David Cronenberg Virtual Exhibition. It features new scholarship and interviews with David Cronenberg's past and present collaborators, rare behind-the-scenes footage, virtual access to materials held by our film reference library, and a very cool interactive map and timeline actually taking you through David Cronenberg's Toronto. TIFF gratefully acknowledges its presenting partner, the Department of Canadian Heritage, and supporter, the Government of Ontario, and academic partners, OCAD University, Sheridan College, and York University. The virtual museum can be experienced in the CIBC Film Gallery on the 4th floor. This is a project of our higher learning team here at TIFF Bell Lightbox. It just does a fantastic job. All of these on-stage interviews we do and all of the work with the higher learning institutions throughout Ontario are under their banner, and this is just an amazing project of theirs. All right, let's get to the meat of the night. Is he here? Yeah. Great. So Guillermo's back. I don't think I need to introduce him, but why don't we just go through it very quickly. He burst onto the scene with Cronos in 1993, won a ton of awards at the Ariels and the International Critics Week Prize at Cannes. 2001, The Devil's Backbone, incredible, masterful film. Developed a unique directorial stamp with fan favorites Blade 2, Hellboy, Hellboy 2, and screenwriting and production credits on over 30 films. Pan's Labyrinth in 2006 took home 3 Academy Awards, and his latest film, Pacific Rim, captivating robots versus aliens sci-fi epic, told in his distinctive style, and which raked in ridiculous amounts of money worldwide. Guillermo and his incredible cinematic mind has become part of our city's landscape, and we couldn't be happier to count him as a new cinephile citizen of the city of Toronto. Now, traditionally, a master class involves the master of a certain discipline delving into his personal approach to his art and craft, but we do things a bit differently here. We have filmmakers talk about the films that have great meaning for them, and Guillermo's joining us tonight, of course, to talk about the work of David Cronenberg and Eastern Promises. We're going to start with about a 30-minute talk at the beginning and have you show the movie, and then we're going to come back for a fulsome conversation with David and then speak to you. And no further ado, please welcome Professor Del Toro.
I have your book.
Welcome.
Thank you, man. Happy to be here every time.
There's a lot of Pacific Rim t-shirts in the house.
Yeah, I like that. Hey, I love you all.
So let's start from a more general perspective. So David Cronenberg is a unique filmmaker. As we were talking before, and I said, you don't see a lot of absolutely direct descendants of him, people actually sort of following in his line, but it feels as though his influence has crossed enormous numbers of filmmakers. Yeah. How do you perceive his legacy and, with your generation of filmmakers?
Well, look, he influenced me early on because he affected me at a visceral level, and at the same time, this incredible compulsion, the pulse between control and loss of control. I grew up Catholic. I knew a lot about repression. When I saw They Came From Within, I thought maybe sex is overrated. I shouldn't dwell. But then I realized it was not. And I said, even parasites are worth it. But in 1985, in one of my short films, Doña Lupe, yeah. There's a radio ad that is announcing parasitic cure from Dr. Cronenberg. I was already in love with the fact that here was a filmmaker that always had one side that was almost clinical, the way he filmed certain things. A lot of them human interactions, and a lot of it, he had a very architectural use of space, real control, and then explosions of lack of control. And the early Cronenberg, more explicitly, sort of gets high on his own supply. You can see him really enjoying what I call his wet period.
Right.
They Came From Within, Rabid,
fluid-rich,
Videodrome. There is no shortage of orifices he won't rub, liquids that he won't photograph lovingly, and then he starts going inwards. Yeah. And that's a very interesting trajectory that we'll talk about. And then he starts being fascinated by the anomalies of the mind and the anomalies of the soul, which is really interesting. He's not a spiritualist or an animistic view. It's really an existential view of what it is to be human, and the way he views the things that make us come in contact with the beyond, and the things that are life-altering, and so on and so forth. But his legacy, I think he's a director's director in many ways.
Interesting.
He's a guy that many directors, myself included, adore. And because one of the things that you admire is when you find a voice in film. And the fact that David has transited through all these genres, through all these things, and you can always hear his voice. It's basically like he's never done a cover. Right. He's always his own song. No matter what he's doing, he can be doing any type of movie. You don't hear him do a cover. He's also a singular presence. He's not a guy that came from here or was influenced by this. I'm not saying he didn't watch movies. Right. He probably was influenced by a myriad of people, but he stands on his own.
It's funny, he actually says that he's much more influenced by literature and reading books than he was actually by watching films. The only films he really talks about are the early Warhols, interesting enough.
Indeed, and that is when you find a singular voice, you want to, you don't study it as much as contemplate it.
Interesting.
It really is.
It gives you confidence, or gives you a certain license.
You can see It definitely, I tell you, in the genre I chose at a very early age, when I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker that dealt in the fantastic. You know, I knew that from a very early age I wanted to do either crime movies, like noir, or fantastic films. And as I defined myself, his voice was very important, because the two filmmakers that stood the tallest for me conceptually in the genre were him and Romero, in with very different agendas. Romero was a guy that you could see understood the subtext of his movies. He was very political. He was completely left-wing, adorably anarchic, you know, but the movies had meat. And with Cronenberg, you have an incredible underlayer of content, and almost a philosophy from day one, you know, a philosophical position about life, an existential position that came with the horror. It was not, as I say always, it was not eye candy, it was eye protein. You know, there were nutrients in his creation, and yet they function as genre films, like Romero. So those two pinnacles for me, they were, when I was growing up, when I was 15, 16, 17, I was saying it is possible to do, not the accidental, you know, now and then you have someone like Terence Fisher, a great artisan working beautifully, James Whale, who very consciously, but very rarely you found someone that articulated more than 6 or 7 films with the will to function as a genre film and as a piece of content.
It's interesting. I love the fact you talked about the fantastic too, because one of the things we've been talking about throughout this whole project is there's this interesting conflation that David actually delights in as well, between him being a horror filmmaker, a science fiction filmmaker, sometimes a fantastic filmmaker, although he's, because of his sort of atheism and existentialism, he's a little suspicious of it as being God stuff. But this sort of genre play also seems to have had a legacy as well. Like, it seems to have given a little bit of license for people to genre blend a little bit. Yes.
Well, what he has is, no matter what he touches, there is a perversity to the way he approaches material, and a celebratory perversity.
Exactly, yeah.
Because let's make that distinction. You can see, even James Whale, for example. James Whale, at his best, in Bride of Frankenstein or Old Dark House, when he has the possibility of liberating a lot of demons in the screen and celebrating the oddness of the characters and the outsider nature of this and that. But there is still scenes like The Monster with the Blind Man, things that have an underlaying of loss, a little bit of guilt, a little bit of Catholic like a Catholic cloud hanging over everything. And with David, there's a willful perversity from day one. And one that says, this is me, you don't like it, get out. From film one, you know, and that is...
As Freud would say, the polymorphous perversity, right?
Indeed, and celebratorily so. And there is a serious license you get when you are a creature like me from a guy like that. Nice. You basically have your passport stamped by a Canadian perverse mind, and you know, it's fantastic.
I was thinking, you also started with a lot of fluids and sort of backed away from them too.
Yeah, but what is funny is there is
Kronos is pretty fluid happy.
There's a lot of there's less than you may remember, but there is one right here where he puts his hand, and that was an accidental homage, because originally the injury, and my wife molded that gelatin chest for me in my company. She's the one that poured the gelatin to put that, and the original injury was here. Right. And I wanted to be Thomas the Doubter and Jesus going in and starting to peel. The day came to shoot it, and there was a split here. And gelatin, if you don't shoot it quick, the split goes
down.
Goes fast. So I said, okay, let's go here. So it's an accidental Videodrome homage. It was completely accidental.
Okay. So let's move to tonight's film. I think when we first corresponded about Cronenberg, and I knew you were such a big fan, I guess maybe many of us thought you would go for like the big monsters,
or Videodrome,
Videodrome, or The Fly. You know, films I know you admire. Yes. But you chose Eastern Promises, probably in some ways the least monster movie of Cronenberg's career.
Well, I find with David, there are 3 movies of his that I can watch addictively. They can be on a loop. And then all of a sudden I go in and sit down and watch, and that's Crash, History of Violence, and Eastern Promises. For whatever reason, those are movies I can go in and out at any time, and they capture me, you know. And I cannot explain it. There are some movies that connect with you at that level. Videodrome, I have to sit down. I have to put everything aside.
You have to make time for
it. Make it a session. But with this, it's almost like a snack that you're addicted to, and you go back over and over again. You know, I'm gonna watch Bigos Ballsack one more time. That's
there's a Twinkie joke in there somewhere.
Let's watch it again. No, I mean, literally, the sauna scene is an incredible lesson in filmmaking. An incredible lesson in filmmaking that has that pulse between control and excess. I mean, I think the entirety of, if you wanted to define David's voice, is that pulse. The pulse between sort of being a proper, distant, objective filmmaker, and the compulsion to go for the violence.
It's true. In a funny way, it's funny, you know, when we were doing our Chinese series this summer, David Bordwell, you know, cited this idea that in the martial arts films, there's this rhythm that you keep hearing, which is this pulse, 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 stop. Pulse, 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 stop. And then the stop happens, it's like Bruce Lee, like, wiping his mouth, or, you know, exactly, or something. And but it's funny. It's the Eastern Promises scene has that flavor, doesn't it? Like there's.
Well, what is really interesting structurally, now you're gonna watch it. Number one, formally, the way it's shot, and the decision. I mean, one of the pieces that is crucial to David's voice is Howard Shore. You know, the fact that he repeats Howard Shore over and over again, and Shore has the cerebral. The marriage of cerebral and emotional that is perfect for David's films, but he chooses to go silent in the fight. You know, he chooses to do that, and I think and the way nudity is shot in that scene is non-flattering, is absolutely incidental in a way, but it speaks tons about thematically about the vulnerability and the lethal quality of Vigo. Literally, Vigo with nowhere to hide a weapon, or not quick access to it at least. You know, it's really what makes him such an effective. How many of you have not seen it before? Just for spoilers.
Oh, you've not seen it. Ooh.
So you know now that you're going to see Vigo's ballsack. I am sorry.
How many people don't know what the spoiler and the big spoiler in the plot is?
Those people.
There's like
so
four of them.
We won't talk about it. We haven't spoiled it completely for you. It's just testicular fortitude that is gone. But
so the bath sequence is this sort of masterful moment.
It's a masterful moment. The way it's shot is shot in you. I mean, I choreographed many action scenes, and the way it's choreographed in a way that is invisible. It's maximum effectivity. You have to hide the gags somewhat, but it never feels like that. You know, when you're doing a sword fight, for example, you know that there's only a number of movements you can do with the safety of the actors, 4 to 7 movements with the sword. Before you go, it's imprudent. Same with a physical fight. There are X number of moments you can do without it looking fake. And David just shoots it with a rhythm that and a security, an absolute reassurance of his craft that can only come at that moment in his craft. I mean, he is now a master filmmaker.
What do you think of the gore in that sequence?
I think it's perfect. We won't ruin it for you, but there's a little gore. Testicles and gore.
Yum.
Yeah. But it's really masterful, minimalistic in a way.
And so tell me about I think that music, what you said about music is so interesting, because the Howard Shore score is particularly lush in Eastern Promises.
Yes.
And so what do you think he's trying to do with that, with the stopping of the music, the starting and stopping?
The funny thing is, we won't ruin this. This is not a spoiler, but there's a deliberate. A filmmaker like David needs to know what he's going to show and what he's not going to show. That's a decision. It can be instinctive. I'm not saying that he spends nights, honey, what's the matter? I'm thinking what I'm going to show and what I'm not. It's not like that. But even instinctively, he needs to do that. And there is a lot of, the ending of the movie is incredibly elliptical. He goes by our knowledge of mob films, and he obviates many things at the end. In order for the structure to work, and we'll talk about it when he's here. But what is great about this is
so it's like a meta mob film. You're saying
it's a meta mob in a way, but it's not postmodern.
Right.
And that's the fascinating thing.
It's not aware of. It's not self-aware.
It's not self-aware. Yeah. But there are two things, and we don't know. We haven't talked to David, but I'm gonna bet. I'm gonna bet one of the things why he wanted to do the film was that sauna scene.
Okay.
First of all, the second thing I believe is, instinctively or intellectually, that's the end of the film. That's the climax. So
he wins in a way.
Well, whatever happens is that's the resolution. Dramatically, cinematically, that's the resolution of the film. Doesn't matter that the story keeps going on. That is the moment where you go. That's the sequence you're going to talk about when you come out, when you come back to see it again. So structuring like that, that's the strongest piece of filmmaking in many, many ways. Now, there are many others, but that's it. And for him to choose to go without music goes hand in hand with other decisions that are made formally for the film. For example, I heard someone compare it. They said it's a Russian Godfather, or it's a Russian. But there is two things that David is allergic to. One is romanticizing, and the other one is to enthrone nostalgia. He has zero nostalgia. So what he does is, in The Godfather, it's all a poem to the male figure, and a poem to the patriarch, yeah. to the father figure. And here the father figure could not be more repugnant, lethal, and completely covered by nostalgia. What is great is that this guy, the bad guy of the film, and this is not ruining it. I'm going to apologize all the time. But the bad guy of the film, this guy is his shroud, his mask is nostalgia. The restaurant he has created is basically like a Russian Disneyland, where they sing Ochichornia, and all the blue-haired ladies cry, and this is
the kids with the
violin,
yeah.
The grandeur of the restaurant, yeah. The opulence of it is an idealized idea of the Russian that cries when he sings Ochichornia. And this is the core of the bad guy of the film. And in The Godfather, family, no matter how screwed up things are, family runs really deep. Blood, and here is, family is a nuisance and a horror and a source of shame and brutality. And so that's his take on the film. Without,
so it kind of turns it over.
Turns it over, and
but it's interesting. Ways. So after the scene in the sauna, you say basically that he's just giving us points in space. You know, that we're getting for the denouement of the movie. He's giving us here's like 10, 15 flashes, you know, of things that you know already.
Well, we will talk about it, but there are deliberate omissions.
Okay. Deliberate
omissions in the end. I mean, this is the second bet. I'm willing to bet they were not shoot. I mean, they were not omissions in the editing room. Okay. That's the way he wanted to tell the story. Interesting. You know, because there are obligatory scenes that a normal American movie would have at the end.
Yeah.
And these are omitted.
Give it away, but,
we won't give it away. But what I was saying, the absence of music is part of this, I think, this willfulness to not romanticize that climax cinematically of the film, and to show it, no pun intended, naked, you know, and cinematically naked, you know. So it is quite a feat. And what happens is, History of Violence and this film sort of consolidate one of the most interesting actor-director partnerships in the last 15, 20 years. You know, I think that they were made for each other. And even if he was ultimately playing Freud by accident in A Dangerous Method, because he was not meant to be the original actor, that partnership is fascinating to watch. And the fact that...
Dangerous Method does come alive in a different way when he enters the movie.
Absolutely. And I remember I met with David before seeing Dangerous Method, and I was saying to him how much I love Jung. And I said, you know, Jung is, I much rather take a long road trip with Jung than with Freud, you know? And he said, watch the movie, you may change your mind. and it was fascinating how he was able to do that, you know?
Turn you around.
Turn me around on that. But with this movie and History of Violence, those are definitely a pair. They are like the moment where David says, okay, you think you know me, let me show you another side. And it's very valuable in the sense because existence is almost like a coda of all the wet period.
Yep.
You know, it's like the last one. It's like the
Baroque,
the swan song or the coda or the final time. And I do think even he kind of feels that doesn't do it for me anymore. And then he goes to a territory that goes completely inwards, which is a spider, you know, where all the melody, all the fluids, the perversity is inside. And I don't think it is still that comfortable. And then comes History of Violence, and it's fascinating.
Too hot, too cold, you think? Kind of like
I think so. I mean, it's...
stripped it too far back.
You know, what career for one that lives it is a different thing than from one that watches it. You can watch the career of a filmmaker and make these assumptions and say, he was searching and he found it. Yeah, but in the meantime, when you're inside the career, you're lost. Right. You're going, oh, I thought this was going to work and it didn't work. I thought this was not going to work and it worked. You never know. And it's fascinating to me to see David then, the moment he opens History of Violence with that long shot, with the dolly, you are in the presence of, basically he becomes Jim Thompson, you know, he becomes the filmic equivalent of a Jim Thompson novel or a hardcore, hard-boiled noir, you know, and even then, if we were talking about that movie, it's completely Cronenbergian. Think about it for a second about Eastern Promises. It belongs eminently in the Cronenberg canon. Why? Because every character in the wet period, in a way, has his essence or her essence written in the body. By DNA, by an intrusion of DNA, by a mutation, whatever it is, who they are is written in their body. Yeah. And Vigo, quite literally, has a chronicle of who he is written in the body through the tattoos of the Russian mob. He literally cannot escape who he is. And there's an interesting thing here, because who he is becomes a central point of the movie. His identity, which identity in David is a constant in his films. So it's completely Cronenbergian. But that identity of Vigo is going to have a crisis soon enough in the film. Who he is, what he is. And the fact that the inflection point for that identity comes with him naked, with who he is completely exposed, is, even if it's accidental, even if it's instinctive, is absolutely crucial. And you see it, it happens in The Fly, it happens in Videodrome. The moments that a character says, this is who I was, this is who I am. And the climax of the film, plot-wise, is him becoming who he really is, in a way.
In a way, it's a triple nakedness, right? Because you get different revelations. You get the tattooing, the fight in the sauna, and then you actually have the hospital. Yeah. You know, and they kind of boom, boom, boom in a row.
In a row.
Yeah. And revealing himself in different ways.
And in fact, we'll talk more about it when we can. But it is incredibly interesting to. I think this is, and I know you may be shocked about, is the most humanistic David film, right before Dangerous Method. And for me to say that with such brutality on screen, but I think is a life-affirming, in a strange way, is a life-affirming film. Yeah, you know, and I don't mean we're going to sing Kumbaya at the end of the fucking movie, but it is
There is a possibility of hope in this film, which isn't present in a lot of the, I'd say, that sort of middle period. In Crash, Existence, you know, and Butterfly, not hopeful films. You know?
And curiously enough, Dangerous Method, for me, is the second life-affirming movie for me, because it says everything is permitted. Right. You know, it says it's much better to embrace who you are, including your perversities, and live.
He really did get you on the Freud bandwagon.
Yeah, he did. No, but it really is great to see that. I don't know what Map to the Stars is going to be, but you know, it certainly is that, and his trajectory is really interesting.
Talk a bit, like, let's get back now to this idea of history of violence and Eastern Promises as a pair. Because someone said something quite interesting recently, which is that they said it's as close to David making a superhero movie as they could imagine, and that they referred to it as Superman movies.
Certainly the first one, yeah. I mean, I think it's you can see, like, one of the things about Eastern Promises that is interesting is how Russian it is. I mean, I really think it has a fatalism that you can see in Chekhov or Dostoevsky, and it's definitely a self-flagellating Russian fatalism in the movie that is very interesting to watch. But there is, in both movies, another aspect which is completely pulp. Mm-hmm. They are both pulp movies in many ways. And
give us some signal, like what are the signs of that? Like,
how many of you did see History of Violence? How many of you didn't see History of Violence? Damn you all.
Only like 5 of them.
No, well,
you'll be punished now.
It's a spoiler for the first 5 minutes of the film, so I'm going to take that license. But it is definitely is sort of Unbreakable. The opening is the same pattern of Unbreakable of a superhero film. That is Clark Kent at the diner, cleaning, wiping, cooking. All of a sudden, is revealed to be a Superman of violence.
Yeah.
You know, and it is that cheap pulp thrill. And that's the thing, is David is a filmmaker that needs as much his control as he needs his thrills. You know, and that is what is fascinating about it. When he goes for the thrill, nevertheless, he does it in such a controlled way. Mm-hmm. Like, imagine...
I guess the first scene of Eastern Promises, too, right?
Same.
So it's kind of pulpy.
It is, but
mobby sort of way.
It is the most mobby scene, including the setting in a barber shop. But I think what is great is that's why I'm saying when he goes for the thrill in the scene in the sauna, it's still done in a very controlled way, and even vouching by the absence of music that he is in control. You know, and this is
asserting it.
He's asserting it, and whereas in the wet period he loses it a little more. Here he's being able to pull himself a little more. You know?
Okay, so let's give them the 3 things that they should pay attention to for Professor's exam at the end.
No, I think that it's interesting to see the main thread of the film is Viggo's character, no doubt. So
we talked before about that he's introduced kind of late. And
pay attention
how that works.
If you can, if you're seeing it for the second time, pay attention to how late he's introduced in the film. And there is a difference in narrative, in fiction. There is a difference between, and certainly on film, who's your main character and who's your narrator.
Yeah.
The main character of the film is Viggo. The narrator is Naomi Watts. But that's a crucial difference. When you're talking in film, you can also say, for example, who's the main character in Scent of a Woman? The boy. Who's the star? Buha, you know, Mr. Pacino. So it's the same thing here. And I think there is a willingness to say it's very important when we introduce him, when he's seemingly part of the background, and when he comes to the front. And Viggo's performance is amazing. I'm going to talk to David about this moment, and for those that you didn't see it, it's a spoiler, so screw that. Close your eyes. No, but there is a moment, this moment, you know, and the way he does it, and I've seen this moment many, many times. His face is down, He does this, and then he goes. You know, if he did it looking up, if he did it any other way, it wouldn't play. But it's such, and that's a superhero gesture. That's a moment that is pure pulp, where you go, yeah, and you go, you're saying yeah to a sociopathic, murderous, and you go, yeah, man. So that's a pulpish thrill.
So the Vigo thread.
The Vigo thread.
Number one.
The scene in the sauna, where it falls, and how it is basically the cinematic. It's not the dramatic climax of the film, but it's the cinematic climax of the film. And the third one?
What else have we been talking about?
We'll see you after the movie.
Oh, do you want to talk about the Vincent Cassel character and the oddness of him?
It's interesting. It's an interesting relationship because ultimately, and we cannot talk about it without spoilers because the ending depends on the relationship of those two characters. But it is as if Fredo and Sony merged into one in The Godfather. You know, it's like the bumbling sociopath killer. It's everything in one. And The Godfather was a cold-hearted, brutal bastard. Mm-hmm. You know, instead of an adorable curmudgeon gangster. You know, but one of the other aspects is that I think David also deliberately. Or instinctively avoids, is the romanticizing of the culture and the food. That's why I said he avoids nostalgia. So that may be the third point.
Yeah, you also talked about the restaurant and the Russianness.
Patriarchal and the nostalgia and all that. Because he most definitely, whether you go to Goodfellas or The Godfather, mob films normally are always giving you a great recipe for calzone or a great meatball recipe. Or there's always this... You know, you go, ultimately these guys love food and love life. There's no pleasure in Eastern Promises. You know, there's a moment where...
There's lavish tables.
There's lavish tables, but they seem remote. Yeah. And even the compliment when Naomi Watts says, oh, this is an amazing borscht. Really?
It doesn't look it.
It looks horrible. You know? There's none of that the trappings of nostalgia and fascination and the patriarchal figure and all that. And that distinguishes from any other mob film. And it gives it a reality because then you realize you're not watching a meta or a reflection upon a genre. It's a very personal take of an incredibly personal filmmaker, and it belongs to his canon.
Fantastic. Vigo, sauna, Russian nostalgia. See you in 100 minutes.
Thank you, guys.
We're back, and just before I introduce our guests, I just want to thank what's remaining of Focus Features, who were able to supply us with that quite extraordinary, what's called select release, which is basically an archival 35mm print. So we're actually seeing that in its 35mm form, so it's great. And I'm sorry I didn't announce it before, but there you are. Let's bring out our guests and start this conversation. First of all, our professor tonight, Guillermo del Toro.
Doctor. I'm a doctor, not a professor.
But what kind of doctor? And the director of Eastern Promises.
El Maestro.
El Maestro, David Cronenberg.
Let me grab one of those water bottles.
There you go.
Very good. I'm teched up here.
So, Guillermo, where do you want to start this? So, should we start it with some of the sort of you said you had some questions about this movie that have been lingering in your head for years.
Well, yes, but we'll get to that. I wanted to ask you, David, how did the project come to you? Where were you? Were you planning another movie? How did it land on you?
Boy, I don't know if I can remember, actually. Honestly, I have some problems with time, the planes of time shifting, and, you know. This was Eastern Promises, right? It wasn't History of Violence.
Yeah.
But I think it came the sort of strangely normal route, which is that it came from an agency. My agents, it was... I can't even remember if it was submitted specifically to me or it was what they call an open assignment. But it was a script by Steve Knight, whose writing I had known, having read some of his other scripts. I knew he was a good writer. And I read it. And I think it was pretty straightforward. I mean, there were changes I wanted to make, quite a few in the script, and but I worked with Steve, and there was I don't know if you want to get into what the script had.
Yes. Anything.
Yeah, it was quite different in that there were scenes that took place in Russia, and there was a character who was a special police inspector in Russia. Could you turn that off? Sorry. And it's not that I'm going to say anything inflammatory, it's just that it's too bright. So, he comes to London and so on. And then there was a grandmother who was going to end up with the kid in a tiny village in Russia. And that was going to be the ending of the movie. And I said to Steve, you know, I think it's wrong. I don't think we should ever go to Russia. Because the force of this is that you have these desperate Russians in exile for various reasons who are trying to recreate a kind of fantasy version of Russia in another country, and isolate themselves and be a kind of strange closed society. And I'm always very interested in closed societies that have their own, it has its own strange rules. It's like the Peking opera, you know, in China and so on. And I said, I think we should get rid of all that, you know, including this major inspector character. And I said, by the way, you're presenting that this child ends up with this grandmother in a small town in Russia as a good thing. But she's a really ignorant, nasty peasant woman in a really nasty little Russian village. I don't think it's great that this kid ends up there. I really.
So hold on, you actually made a happy ending.
I thought this is not a happy, you know, it's not even a sort of happy ending. And
it's not like when James Woods blows his brains.
Well, but that is a happy ending if you know James.
That
is. So, so those were major changes,
what was it that attracted you to the project? Do you remember at the time? Was there
so
something?
much money they were paying. I always say that because I'm hoping that somebody listening will say, "Oh well." Well, as I say, it's, you know, I had already done a gangster film, which was History of Violence, in a sense, a gangster film, and it was my first gangster film, and so I wasn't really looking for another gangster film. But it was so exotic, and for some reason there's a resonance. I don't know. I mean, my ancestry is Lithuanian, and I thought maybe there's some connection. You know, Russia had always been fascinating before and after the revolution, and then after the other revolution. Right. You know, and I just found it a fascinating kind of culture, very different from any of my upbringing, because it is very shot through with religion and superstition and the feeling of Mother Russia and the mysticism that goes with that. That's also very dark, really dark, depressive kind of stuff. But dramatically, that's great. I mean, you wouldn't want to live there. I don't mean in Russia, I mean in that state of mind. I wouldn't. And I don't. But I love that for my characters. It puts them in this incredible pressure cooker. And then, of course, you know, it's hard to resist a society where there are unspoken rules, and they're kind of exotic, weird rules of behavior. What constitutes betrayal? What constitutes loyalty? You know, all of that stuff. And so, oh yeah, and there wasn't much tattooing. That wasn't really a big thing.
It wasn't big in the script.
No, in the script, no. And Vigo and I really got into that, and I found this book called Russian Criminal Tattoos. There's like 3 volumes, and it's all about where it came from in the gulags, you know, and even in Tsarist times, and the history of Russian criminal tattoos and what the tattoos meant, and how they were kind of like your passport, and had your whole history in them. And if you acquired a tattoo that you didn't deserve, you would immediately be killed by somebody, because you couldn't have those stars if you didn't deserve those stars, and so on and so on. And you're reading about people, the old guys lamenting that now everybody's got tattoos in Russia, and they have all these tattoos, and they didn't earn them. They didn't kill anybody. They didn't spend 80 years in prison, and it's just fun for them, and they hate that because it no longer has the depth.
Where are our principles?
Yeah, where are our principles? And so, and the idea that in a Russian prison, which is a pretty difficult place to live for sure, that still there is a code of some kind of honor, some kind of structure necessary just to be alive. You had to have that to survive. So all of that was really fascinating, and that got added into the script. There was no scene where he's getting tattooed, for example. None of that was there.
Let me ask you, the interesting thing about the ending for me is that it almost, not in a meta or postmodern way, but it almost, the whole movie for me bypasses the sentimentality of mafia films about the patriarch being ultimately a bonhomme and the cooking and the festiveness of it. Yeah. It really is very stark. Yeah. But for me, what is great about the ending is that the ending, really the climax for me is the solace cinematically. But then you avoid showing the sort of just desserts of the patriarch. You do an ellipsis to Vigo alone in the table, and there is no satisfactory. They got Armin Mueller-Stahl. Yeah. There's a will, and I was saying before you came that I think that was by design. It was not an editing choice. You didn't shoot that scene and took it out, right?
No.
Yeah.
No. I've made.
You're 2 for 3.
I've sort of forged a career through denying my audience closure. That's it. I just
stern master.
I just wrote my first novel, and the publishers it'll be published next year say, I don't know that this ending. They're worried about the ending, and they say your fans they'll be disappointed. And I said, I don't have any fans as a novelist. You must be thinking of those other fans, my film fans. This is different. They said, yeah, but we don't think it'll provide closure. And I said, yes. Just what I wanted to hear. So, but that's the way life is. I mean, death is sort of a closure, except when it happens to you. I don't know if you get to enjoy it. It's like so. It's things hang. And yet there's a deliciousness and a rightness when you find the right way to not have closure. Mm-hmm. And also it leaves the way clear to a sequel.
But it's also
no closure equals sequel.
Funny enough, I think I sustain that's one of the reasons why long arc episodic TV is now so satisfying, because we have forced this 3-act structure where things pay off and all that in Hollywood movie making. I'm not saying all movie making, but it's great to see a genre piece that ultimately is dependent on very pulpy roots and emotions and all that. Have that exercise of control, and withhold that type of emotion.
Yeah, well, I can't say that I ever did an analysis. I certainly have never gone to a script writing school or seminar or anything like that. But I know what goes on there, and
perversity,
and it's hideous. Don't go there. But it's an intuitive thing. You just say, this is corny, this is forced, this is not real. This is actually betraying everything that you've just done, and so you just don't do that. So I think your analysis is correct, but it's not something that I consciously did.
You didn't strip all of that stuff out of a script. It was. The
ending with the the baby going back to Russia and stuff was meant to be kind of corny, sappy, good. And I said, it's not even going to do that, though, because this grandmother is quite a hideous character.
Well, and you have all these characters escaping, and you're sending one back.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that's very important for me in the way that you find your voice through the process of making the movie, because you see Dirty Pretty Things, which Stephen Knight also wrote, which has a very good, but there's a bow tying in the ending.
Yeah.
There is a happy ending. The lovers are separated, but everything is everything is good.
No, who knows what kind of development went on there. I think Steve, I know him well. He's now directed a couple of movies himself. He's a lovely guy, and actually quite wealthy because he owns a brewery, actually, called Freedom Beer.
You should take note.
Yeah, he in England, that's a big deal. And also he invented Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And so he is.
Wow.
So
he said me.
He loves screenwriting. He loves it, loves it, loves it. And I think that he has so much affection for his characters that he can't bear to hurt them. I, however, I can hurt them. And I think so that I actually think in his writing there is a tendency to do that because he wants the best for his characters. And it's very sweet. But dramatically, it's not always the best way to go. So that's why you get a collaboration. I don't know how much input Stephen Frears had on Dirty Pretty Things or not. I don't know what the original script was. But I could imagine that he would do that, Steve.
One of the other things that I enjoyed a lot is there is a sort of gloomy sense of loss that is almost literary and very, very Russian.
Yeah, it's a little Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, not Tolstoy, but a little Dostoevsky. Well, those are the wonderful, when you have Russia and even criminals, because of course Dostoevsky was very interested in criminals and criminal behavior and at times was in prison himself, and so technically was a criminal. There is that in the Russian temperament, and the idea of isolating it away from Russia so that it was like even a more compressed hothouse version of that was very appealing to me. And there was always a question of how do you bring that out? How do you have it visually and the interaction of the Russian expatriates with the other expatriates in England, whom almost none of whom are English. They're Turks, they're Chechens,
Yeah, the pharmacy owner, the
Indian,
the Indian customer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so did the restaurant, was that a very important development, as you were sort of like getting the film together, that it had to look a certain way and feel a certain way?
Yeah. I mean, that is the creation of the Armin Mueller-Stahl character, that he has, created a little Russia for himself. And everybody who goes there for that.
Yes.
They know that everybody there's going to be Russian. They will all understand each other.
Yeah. They'll all know your name.
They all know your name. Even if they hate each other, it's Russian hate, so it's okay. And so the design by Carol Spear, who you've worked with and was brilliant, beautiful, and very over the top, but not in a cinematic way. It's over the top the way their sensibility would have it. I mean, I'm sure you can find that restaurant in Moscow right now.
Except much smaller and narrow.
Yes. Well, this one is actually probably smaller than what they've got in Moscow. There's some amazing things going on there.
And when you approach the scene in the sauna, when you approach it, was it a very daunting scene, or were you
No, because it was written like, he's sitting there with the towel. Two Chechens come in. One pulls a knife. They fight. There's some blood. He staggers out. End of scene. So I was like, okay, no problem. Then you start to think, wait a minute, how am I going to do this? And we looked at a Turkish sauna in London, and it was an amazing one, but they were renovating it, and they were taking away all these amazing tiled mosaics and stuff and replacing them with really hideous stuff. And so we thought, okay, we have to build our own. So we built it. And in building it, I could say, okay, so now I can see I want to begin with this space, claustrophobic, dead-end space, that opens out into here, and we have some little kind of banquette, and so on and so on. And we could design it with the fight in mind, and the space that I wanted to travel, because I didn't want it to be just one little enclosed thing. I wanted it to move around. And then we started to work with stunt people, a stunt coordinator, excuse me, one second. And we had it was a very good stunt coordinator who works with the actors and would work with them when they weren't shooting. And then at lunchtime, he'd say, come and see what we've got done so far. And they would mark out the space in a sort of rehearsal hall. And we'd start to do stuff. And I'd say, look, I'm going to shoot with a very wide lens. I'm shooting with a 21mm lens. I'm shooting pretty much the whole movie that way. That means that to do a close-up, I have to be here. And I'm going to shoot every shot with that lens. Well, there's a big problem, because if I do a punch like this, and I've got a long lens back here, it looks like I've hit you. But if I'm here, I have to really almost hit you for it to be convincing. So the stunt guys hate that lens. They hate the way I'm shooting it. But they don't say I hate it. It's just that I know that it's giving them problems. So I was saying, so as you're choreographing this scene, as we work it out, you have to understand how we're going to shoot it. And so even that came into play. And then at some point, Viggo says, well, it's obvious I'm going to have to do this naked. And I said, yeah. And that was pretty much the discussion.
Wow.
It was obvious because it would be stupid, otherwise, because he'd have the towel. What do? You have him fight and the towel doesn't drop. Of course, the classic way to do that is you just shoot from the waist up or the waist down. He knows immediately that Viggo is so experienced. He knows that will restrict not just me, but him in terms of coverage of how we shoot the thing. So it was a pretty simple discussion. Now, you can't, if you had an actor who said, I cannot do this naked, or you can only shoot me from here or do this or do that, then that's the game you're playing, but then it's a different game, and you cannot then shoot it the way I shot it. Now, I don't do storyboards, so I waited until we had blocked the whole scene, and then now we're shooting, and I don't have any idea how I'm going to shoot it, except that, but that's the way I always work. It's the way I've developed it. It's not the only way to work. But I need to be there with the actors in the location before I have an idea how I want to shoot this. And then I just start, and it's almost like a documentary. I'm covering it. I'm showing every element of what's going on. So in a way, it's like found art at that point, even though there's been so much prep, but it's a spontaneous thing.
But you're stripping a lot of the, whatever the choreography was, the end result is it doesn't seem choreographed. There is no stuntiness to it.
No. And that's another discussion you have. I say choreography because even if I'm talking about two people sitting in a room, I talk about choreography of the scene. But I don't mean that it's not like I want it to look like a ballet, I want a lot of slow motion. No, we have those discussions. Do you want it to look like a ballet? Are you going to shoot in slow motion? Are you going to shoot anything? That's the discussion you have with the effects guys, the stunt guy. And you say, no, I want it to be absolutely real and awkward and brutal and clumsy and nasty. And that's the tone of it.
But that said, you have a lot of decisions there that are technical, that are brilliantly and apparently simply designed. But you have a blade. You have an actor. You have a blade. So you're going to need to decide if you're using a rubber blade, one that is without an edge, or you're putting it digitally. Yes. And one of my favorite shots is the final shot, where the guy loses the blade. You see the blade clinking around, Viggo grabs it, embeds it on the eye, and I guess the blood is digital?
Yes, at that point it is. Yeah,
but even then, it's just amazing.
Yeah, because it's one shot.
It's one shot. Yeah. You're saying nothing here, nothing there, fuck it.
That's right.
and we all go, because if you did a cut, there's a certain part of the audience that goes,
yeah,
there's a cut.
And that's exactly right. But beyond that, there are things you don't think about is that, you know, after take 5 of Viggo getting thrown and falling on that tile, he was bruised, he was battered, you know. And some of the places we managed to put some soft tiles where he was going to land, but not all the time.
Not all the time.
That was a very hard surface.
Yeah.
He's naked. I'm shooting wide. There's nowhere to hide pads. He never had any pads.
And the blood on him, once he rolls over, clean the tile.
That's right.
Take it all away. Now the tile is stained. Let's go over
It took 2.5 days to shoot.
2.5. That was my next question.
Yeah.
Still, 2.5 days.
It's not bad for that. No.
Not bad for that at all. Yeah, beautiful.
Amazing. We could go to questions of the audience, or you had some questions about Viggo, I know that you wanted to ask.
Just one, and then we'll go to you guys. Just one.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moments in the movie is, you know.
I know.
Yeah, okay. I never told you, but you know. So what was that? You, him?
That was Viggo.
Tell me about it.
The confrontation on the street, you know.
Yeah.
And it gets very tense. And there's yelling. And Viggo goes.
Yeah.
I said, I like that. Where'd you get that? I don't know. I don't know. It feels very authentic to me. That was
so it was not research or...
No. That was just...
It feels completely true.
I know. And I think I've heard, and I really have heard that, all of the Dvori in Russia love this movie, and B, they all do this now.
Well, it is a little bit like what happened in Mexico after Scarface.
Yeah.
And before Scarface, everybody started getting the high-powered weapons, the lions, the jaguars, the tigers. You know, the power of movies.
Yeah, it's, you know, I've added something to Russian criminal behavior, and I'm very, very proud of that, actually.
Someone will get that textbook of, you know, the tattoos and
the Cronenberg move.
Exactly.
Russian criminal.
We're going to open it up to you guys. So if you just wait for the mic. We have mics, right? There's one back there. Anyone else? There's one right there. 2 in here. 0. Yeah, there we go. Yep, you go, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Cronenberg about his collaboration with Robert Santos, because, I mean, he's a pretty famous producer here in Canada, and I just wanted to know...
With Robert Lantos on this film.
Yeah, with Robert Lantos on this film.
Well, Robert and I go back a long way. We've known each other for many years. And when you're trying to put a movie together that is a co-production, and most of the films that I've done, certainly recently, have been co-productions, and that's the way I get to make movies. So, for example, I think there are, I'm trying to remember, I think there are no Americans in this movie. Viggo is there on a Danish passport. He has a Danish passport as well as an American passport. And that might seem like a weird thing to say, but in fact, when you're doing a co-production, the passports of the people that you hire, not just the actors, are crucial, because you have an agreement. You have an agreement between two countries. How much money is spent here? How much money is spent there? What is the nationality of this person, and so on. So. If you're going to do a co-production, even though it's a focus feature, American company, but really it was done as a co-production between Canada and the UK, then you need a Canadian producer on one side, and you need a UK producer on the other side. And so it's just a question of who is going to do that. And I suggested Robert, as I remember, Lantos. I said, I think he's the right guy to co-produce this movie. And so, that's basically, I don't know if I've really answered your question, but that's sort of how it worked. He wasn't involved right at the beginning, but as you gradually structure it, you get to work with people that you trust, and you feel have the right energy for that movie.
Great. Do you have a mic there? Someone? Who's got a mic? Go.
Thank you both for doing this. Can you hear me?
No.
No, but I'll repeat it.
Okay, well, this is a question for Mr. Cronenberg. I felt like Viggo Mortensen's character... Thank you. Hello. I felt like Mr. Viggo Mortensen's character was very similar to Ed Harris's character in History of Violence through the mannerisms, like the way he looked up or moved. Did you do that on purpose? Because I remember, say the first, one of the first shots that you see of Viggo, he looks down and he looks up at the camera, and then it felt like that was also one of the first times when you see Ed Harris in History of Violence, the way he moves and the way he smiles. Was that done on purpose? Did Viggo model, I guess, a bit of his mannerisms from History of Violence?
All criminals do that. There's actually a school for criminals. They all go to it, and they all learn to do this stuff. Well, I haven't ever heard that before. Certainly, I think that Ed Harris's character is very American, and Viggo's is not, obviously. So no, it was definitely. I've never thought of that before. I'm sure you're right.
Yeah. Guillermo, do you because you were talking about the pairing of the two films a little bit.
Well, what I wanted to ask you is there is the other thing that this is not, and is surprising, and is the big twist in the film, quite deep into the movie, is this is not Donnie Brasco. This is not a guy going undercover. And I mean, it seems to me that it's almost, Viggo's character is full of mystery. It has a mystique about him and all that. Yeah. But what is great, what is really thrilling for me, at least, is that it seems to me that his acceptance of the only good deed he's going to do, which is saving the baby, is also his doom.
Yes.
But there's an ambivalence at the end where his character almost would be the opposite. Whether he was a cop or not, he was an undercover criminal posing as a cop to get there. It's like his true nature is that. Yes. He is the beast. He's a beast at the end.
Yeah, I think that's why he's good at it, because that's really him. Yeah. I mean, one of the problems with thinking of a sequel for Viggo, and we did think of it, and there has been a script written, is that...
Can I read it? Later?
I'll email it to you. Okay. Well, is that the...
Pardon.
Is that the... That would be good. I think that's the trailer right there.
Teaser.
But the problem is that as soon as you start revealing things about the character, then some of that mystery goes. And does that? You really want to do that? That's really the problem with the sequel.
Right. Yep. We got a mic.
I was actually going to ask you about the sequel, but obviously you just jumped on that. We all do definitely want to see a sequel, for the record. If you want to start a Kickstarter right now, we'll give you money out the side. Since you've addressed that, I was wondering what regular Russians thought of the film.
I don't think there is such a thing.
Okay.
There are no regular Russians.
Mexicans liked it.
And they're like Russians.
Yeah, I have no idea.
It was released there, though. And,
I really was only worried about the worry, because if they didn't like it.
Where we got have a mic? There.
I'm curious about the placement of the police scene, the first scene where the body's discovered. Did you move that scene from place to place, or did you always plan it to be there?
Great location.
Yeah, you mean in front of the barriers?
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
My question was more, it's an isolated scene where the body is discovered by the police.
Yeah.
In terms of the flow of the film, did you have it later at one point? Did you ever think of moving it back and forth?
Yeah.
Or did you always want it to be there? Because the police are introduced very early on.
Yeah, no, I think it was always there. I can't remember. Yeah, no, I don't remember that being shifted around particularly. Mm-mm.
It is an unusual scene because you sort of get into the sort of the police procedural part of it, which is sort of abandoned then for a while until, of course, later when you have a big reveal. It's funny. It's a very interesting piece of foreshadowing.
Blame Steve Knight. If you don't like it, it's the writer's fault. If you do like it, it's the director's fault.
Yep, up there.
Hi there. Guillermo spoke a little earlier about what Howard Shore brought to this film. I mean, this is the second time I've seen this, and the music since the first time and this time is just still as evocative. Can you tell me a little bit about what Howard Shore brought to this?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember desperately. I'm just working with him on my new movie. You know, we didn't want it to be traditional hokey Russian theme, you know. And yet we knew there was a kind of operatic element to it. So it was really a question of, and you know, with Howard and I mean, it's very hard to talk about music. It's such an emotional, visceral medium. It's hard to be articulate and say something real about it that isn't actually, in fact, totally subjective. How do you get objective about it? So, but we have a very good rapport that way. And it was really finding something that felt that it could come out of the community of these people, but that wasn't sort of kitschy Russian stuff.
Folkloric.
Yeah, not folkloric and not... Yeah, and so it was really just trying to find the level of it. And of course it's an intense, passionate drama with intense, passionate people. And something of that tone had to be in the music as well, you know. And then there are different themes. I mean, it's you have the mother, the daughter, and the baby. And then you have the different criminal elements and stuff, and it's trying not to, okay, well, the Turk's there, we'll get some Turkish elements, you know. It's easy to do that, but it usually feels very hokey and gimmicky. And the thing with Howard and I, we always feel that the obvious way that music is used in movies, which is just to emphasize what's there, is really a waste. It's a kind of waste of an incredible opportunity to add a whole other level of emotional and even at times intellectual response. It's great if, in other words, if, you know, the tendency always is, okay, this is a sad scene, so let's have really sad music to make it more sad. Or often you have someone thinking, there's not really enough suspense here, we'll try to add it with the music, you know. Howard and I really automatically avoid that kind of stuff, and we really try very hard to add another layer of emotional, another plane, you know. But of course, it's one thing to say that, and how do you manifest that in music? And that's a very subtle, beautiful thing that Howard can do. I mean, I think he can really do that.
But in a way, it's a film that is very stripped of romanticism, and I think that by contrast, Howard adds a layer of emotion in a way.
Yes.
With the music that almost make the decisions by the driver, by Viggo's character, seem to come from an emotional place or complete that journey sort of for the audience.
Well, that would be the extra layer,
yeah.
You know, right. That would be the extra layer. And it would be wrong if it, you know, if it could be false. But the way Howard writes, it's never false.
Fantastic. We have to, unfortunately, we only have time for one more. I'm sorry, guys, but we have one right there. Make it a good one.
I'll try. Thank you for no pressure. First of all, I want to say thank you for both of you for taking the time to do this. If you don't mind stepping outside of this one film, we have in front of us sort of a, you know, a born and bred Torontonian and a sort of favored adopted son. Could you both talk, if at all, how living in Toronto has maybe shaped you creatively as filmmakers?
It has shaped me here.
I'm trying to catch up to Guillermo.
I didn't have this before.
Well, it certainly shaped me totally, you know. I mean, it wasn't a no-brainer to stay in Toronto when I started to make films. In fact, it was very difficult to stay in Toronto because there was no film industry here. There was in Quebec for French filmmakers, but not for English-speaking Canadians. And that was that far from for me from having to go to LA and the way Ivan Reitman did, for example, to have a career. And I really didn't want to do that because I really felt that, you know, Hollywood is a very dense planet and it's got great gravitational pull that warps everything that comes within sight of it. And I knew that if I lived there, I would make very different kinds of films than what I wanted to make.
And you almost did a couple of times.
And I almost did.
Yeah, you escaped that gravitational
yeah,
pull.
no, it came close. It's shocking for some people to realize that just in my last movie, Maps of the Stars, I shot for 5 days in LA, and it's the first time I shot a photo film in America. I've never shot anything in the US. It's almost all been here. And I have to say, I mean, people, you know, like Adam McGoyan said, I'm his mentor. One of the reasons I'm his mentor is because I showed that you could have an international career and stay in Canada. The city has I say it's a character in my movies, you know? It's like an actor. And so I never had a problem with people saying, well, yeah, it's shot in Toronto, but you're trying to make it look like New York. I said, yeah, that's great. You know, that's not bad. Because the city's like an actor, a great actor, a character actor who can play many, many roles. So in Maps of the Stars, we shot 24 days here and 5 days in LA for a movie that's set totally in LA. And it works great. And I love that. And I love to be shooting around the corner from my house, which I did for a week and a half for Maps of the Stars. So the city, you know, I was born, raised in Crawford and College Street, 446 Crawford Street. You can look it up on Google, you know, map. Maps of the Stars. You know, now, when Rob Ford talks about rich elites, I think he's talking about me. And I object to that, because if you look at 446 Crawford Street and then you look at the house that he was raised in, he's the rich elite. Anyway, in fact, it was strange for me. Eastern Promises was the first movie that I shot totally not in Canada. It was all shot in London. And that was a first for me. Because even M. Butterfly, which takes place in China and Paris, was shot mostly in Toronto. So that was an interesting experience for me. And I enjoyed it. It was a good experience. But I draw a lot of power from the city. My roots are very deep. And they go very deep, and I get a lot of nutrient from it. What can I say?
So, Mr. Del Toro, what brings you here?
I honestly...
How you doing?
Well, I honestly can say that the way you build a family as you grow older, I mean, you're born with one family, and then you find people that become your family as you go through life. It's the same way I think that you go about finding homes. You know, and I think that it's a rare occasion that you need to celebrate when you find a place where you feel at home, you know. My needs are very simple. I need great bookstore and great food. You know, and Toronto has both. Amazing bookstores, amazing food, and the people. I mean, the first time I came to Toronto, I came to the festival. And I must say, the festival is such a great expression about the way people in this city love film. You know?
Thank you.
I remember the first time I came to the festival, I was on a taxi cab, and I was arguing about the merits of some obscure filmmaker. Last time I gave my chat about Hitchcock here, I took a cab back home, and I was talking to the cab driver, and I said, he said, what did you do in TIFF? I said, I gave a talk about Hitchcock. He says, which film? I go, well, you know, shut off at that. And then he starts talking to me about Hitchcock very articulately. I'm not saying that's the norm, but there is certainly the spirit. The spirit of Toronto is amazing. The crews are amazing. I think that you have a quality of life and a quality of work. And combining both in one single place is amazing. You know, you have great people, culturally a city that is incredibly alive, and the crews are amazing. I mean, I really love my crew. We have a very, very good relationship. the way I love that you have corrupt politicians. So I feel right at home. When I see the crack video, I go, Mexico. I love it. You know? But no, it really is. It really is.
We did it for you. Just
he said, "This one's for you, Guillermo."
Actually, what people don't know is that Rob Ford is Mexican. We imported him.
I knew it. No, but what it has shaped is I really have found a place that I will come back over and over again. And I'm not saying this because I'm here. I've said this publicly. Honestly, TIFF is a big thing for me. The Lightbox is a big thing for me. The relationship I have here and with you guys, I treasure. I treasure because I love discussing film. You can't do that in Hollywood. That's the one thing you don't do much. Or you have to go to the Cinematheque, which is an hour and a half drive from my home. And I love sharing film, not for the love of the business, not for the comps, the box office, the predictions, the tracking. I love discussing film for film. Mm-hmm. And this is a unique place to do it. You have in here, in this amazing projection rooms, in this institution, in this place, you have a shrine that is a rarity. You have it here so it looks like it should be normal. It isn't. You have an amazing place, and to be part of it, it's a huge draw for me. I honestly cannot tell you how much. If I could live a floor above here, I would live a floor above here. So it's really a great place, and you'll see me around a lot, a lot.
Well, amazing.
And El Maestro.
Well, of course.
That's why I'm here.
Of course, we'll be using that for a clip reel. But now's the time to call it for an evening. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you so much, David Cronenberg, Guillermo del Toro. Great night.